Please won't you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts together find their way into the heart of God this morning. Amen. So, I know from the internet that New England doesn't have 4 seasons. It has 12. Do you know what they are? Winter, Fool's Spring, Second Winter, Spring of Deception, Third Winter, the Pollinating, Actual Spring, which lasts about 2 days in Massachusetts, Summer, Hell's Front Porch, False Fall, Second Summer, and Actual Fall. So where are we right now? Pollinating? What's the other one?
I think it's third winter.
Third winter. You think it's third winter? It's kind of nice out today, Becky.
Today, but yesterday it was cold.
Good point. Good point. And there's still snow in Pete's backyard. There's still snow in my backyard too, in some places. I actually think that the answer is none of the above, because they forgot a season, so they can't be a real New Englander. It is mud season, right? How did they skip mud season? We are in mud season. There's still snow in Pete's backyard. There's also mud. And mud season is a dirty, slimy hazard. You can go out on a walk right now and lose a shoe, right? And still, there's a lot of growth happening under all that mud, waiting to bless us with some serious beauty, amen? So I don't know, by next month, it might be actual spring for 2 days. And we'll have buds on trees and green grass and daffodils. We'll have daffodils soon, right? And sun and birds chirping and resurrection. It really is a mud blessing that we are experiencing right now, right? A mud blessing. So today, in the height of mud season, we heard a story about a what? A mud blessing. That's right. How appropriate for the lectionary to give us that. It was a spit and dirt blessing, a God with us, willing to get his hands messy to heal our spiritual blindness, mud blessing, a tender and grimy grace. We progressive Christians have a tendency to think we can see better than everyone else. We are better than those non-Christians, of course, because we go to church on Sundays and volunteer to serve at community lunches and on mission trips and committees, and we give money to causes we support, and we visit the sick. And we aren't like those other Christians everyone can't stand, because we are the least hypocritical, right? The most like Jesus, certainly. We really practice what we preach, we boast. We are thinking Christians, right? We use our brains. We take the Bible seriously, but not literally. We are truly welcoming to all people, not like that church down the street that doesn't even have a rainbow flag. We believe in the right causes, and they don't, right? We think we can see better than everyone else. But we tend to point out the speck in other people's eyes while refusing to acknowledge the log in our own. My daughter, Cecilia, is almost 17, and she's still learning to drive right now. It's taking her a long time. Her most challenging task, besides parallel parking, of course, is the lane change. She knows how to put on her blinker, and she gradually move over to the next lane. But her problem is what? She always forgets what? To check the blind spot. She has trouble understanding why she even has to. This is what we've been trying to explain this, and she doesn't really get it. Why can't I just look in front of me or in my rearview mirror and my side mirrors? I have all these mirrors, right? Why should I have to check over my shoulder? And we have to explain that it's the blind spot that can kill you, right? We are so busy looking ahead of us or looking behind us that we forget to check what we are blind to, what we cannot see at all. And that's what's going to get us into an accident, right? So after 17 years of living in Boston, I was quite accustomed to overlooking the people who sit in doorways and alleyways asking me for money, as if they were part of the city's landscape instead of fellow human beings. Sometimes if I had spare change, I obliged and gave it to them, but if I didn't, or if I didn't feel like digging it out in my purse, I would simply ignore people altogether as I hurried past them on the city streets. And this week, I took my daughters on Wednesday night to see Into the Woods, or Thursday night, which by the way was so good. You should all see it if you get a chance, in Boston. And as we were walking from the parking garage to the theater, I passed a homeless man who was sitting on the sidewalk with my daughters in tow. I had my blinders on completely until he asked me for $1. And I realized in that moment that my daughters were with me and they were watching me. So I stopped, turned my head around and mumbled quickly, "Hello, I'm sorry, I don't have $1. Have a good night." It was a pathetic greeting, little more than a guilt-induced afterthought. And there are so many people that you and I walk past without a second look. The awkward teen who bags our groceries, the immigrant women who clean our hotel rooms, the people at coffee hour who are standing alone who we do not know, the shyest person in the office. There are so many invisible people, and we forget to check our blind spots. No one, though, is invisible to God. Everyone is a treasure. So in the story we heard today from the Gospel of John, the text says Jesus saw a man born blind. Seeing him in and of itself is an act of healing, just seeing him. Jesus sees the invisible people and demands that we too notice, though. And so the disciples ask him, what did this man do? Why did God punish him with blindness? What did his parents do? It was, of course, common in those times for people to assume that all sickness or disability or tragedy that befell people was a punishment by God for some venial sin that they had committed. And in fairness, it is still the way we think, yes, even us progressive Christians. It's not just televangelists who blame earthquakes, the AIDS crisis, and tsunamis on God's rage at homosexuality and drug abuse and devil worship, but also by people like us. People whose marriage is falling apart, or who get a terminal diagnosis, or whose child is born with a disability, or a child who is addicted to opioids, or people who struggle with infertility, or who lost a job, or who lost a spouse. And we think, why is God punishing me, right? We still think that. Why is God punishing me? What did I do? Jesus puts that myth to rest immediately in this text. He says, neither the man nor his parents did anything to cause this. He says, look instead to what God can do. He does something rather peculiar to give this man vision, right? What does he do? First, he what? He spits. Sarah's making the most disgusted face. He spits. He creates mud with his spit. And maybe, like for Sarah, it's hard for us to picture the Son of God spitting on the ground like a 20-something in a subway station early in the morning, right? But he is fully human, fully embodied. I'm sure he has earwax buildup, Sarah, and sweaty armpits, and has to clip his fingernails just like we do, right? And there were no fancy mani-pedi places in those days. And apparently Jesus can hawk a loogie with the best of them. Can you imagine how much saliva that must have taken to make mud with one man's spit, right? Let's just go real deep here. Then Jesus does something against all COVID protocols, right? What does he do? Yeah, he takes the mud and he rubs it in the man's eyes. Just rubs it all up in there, takes his spit, rubs it all in his eyes. Right. Spit and dirt. He tells the man to get up and wash it off in the river called Siloam, which means sent. He doesn't just give the man born blind sight, he gives him agency. So the man does what he's told, and after that, his whole world changes. Like when you first get new glasses. Who here remembers the first time they got glasses after not being able to see very well? Do you remember like looking at trees and being like, oh, I had no idea they looked like this, right? And you could see them sort of etched against the blue sky and it felt like magic. Can you imagine being sighted after not having sight for your entire life? Suddenly, he can see the wrinkles on the faces of his mother and father. So when the man washes the dirt out of his eyes, he lets in healing, he lets in new life, he lets in new vision. He was blind, but now he sees. No wonder Jesus claims to be the light of the world. And what happens is that everyone around the man is pissed. They are. They're completely confused, they're disoriented, they're mad. The whole town can't believe it. Isn't that the blind beggar we ignored? The town says, nah, it can't be. Others says, it just looks like him, right? And the man says, no, it's really me. I can see. And they demand, who opened your eyes? And he says over and over again, a man who smeared mud in my eyes with spit and then told me to wash in the river. And he just keeps repeating the story. The townspeople march the man born blind to the Pharisees, who are the religious leaders of the town. And like religious leaders often do, they fought with each other over the theology of it, the rules. They fought about who Jesus really was. The religious leaders can't even be excited that a miracle has occurred because they're too busy fighting over why. Does this sound familiar? They demand answers from the man's parents, and his parents are like, I don't know, he's a grown man, go ask him yourself, right? And then they ask him once again, and exasperated, he keeps telling that story of the mud and the spit over and over and over again, his mud blessing. And instead of being met with awe and gratitude for God, the religious people are just angry. Jesus broke their rules by healing on the Sabbath, but he also upset the power structure by taking this previously unseen man and forcing them to notice him. They, the disciples, the neighbors, the religious leaders, the whole faith community, all of them now had to acknowledge his existence, his humanity, his treasuredness. They had to hear his story and let it change the fixed way in which they viewed the world. They watched him grow from powerless and pitiable to someone with agency and voice. All of them had to recognize that he would no longer simply function as more or less an invisible object of their scorn and their charity. So they toss him out of the temple. He no longer has a religious community. They ostracize him from it. And there's not just a church to go to across the street, like the Congregational Church in West Boylston. If you get tossed out, you're just out. So while everyone fights about who Jesus is and how the miracle happened, the man born blind rejoices in knowing who he is. He returns to Jesus and worships him. Master, I believe, he says. My husband Andy went to conservative Christian college. Some of you know this. Gordon College, it's on the North Shore. His best friend there grew up as a devout, Bible-thumping, twice-a-week church-attending Southern Baptist true believer from the South. The only problem was that he was gay. And when he finally came out to his pastor and parents when he was at Gordon College, they reminded him that practicing homosexuality was a sin, and they sent him to one of those pray away the gay summer camps, you know? They really exist, they're real. And he went several times. He earnestly hoped to be cured of his homosexuality, so he kept trying, he really did. And he was finally healed. He was finally healed, not of his homosexuality, but he was healed when he accepted the way that God made him to begin with. He rejoiced in who he is. He fulfilled his church needs in the safe, welcoming community of the gay clubs and bars in Boston, where he could finally be himself, not at his church, but in the bar. Like the man born blind, he was driven out of the church because he was finally whole and healed. Jesus said, "I came into the world to give sight to the blind and to show those who think they see that they are blind." While religious authorities fight over who is in and who is out, who God is and what the right way to worship is, God is helping us to rise up with a tender and grimy grace. Love is continually cleansing us of our unseeing to open our eyes upon this ordinary and stunning world, even in mud season, right? When I was in La Romana, one of the most memorable, this is our Dominican Republic medical mission trip that I just came back from a few weeks ago, for those of you who don't know. So when I was there in the city of La Romana, one of the most memorable and moving moments for me was a small act of ministry that was not on the mission field at all, but in the women's dorm room. There were a lot of us stuffed in there in bunk beds, and we had to figure out how to be a community, you know, all smushed together and snoring and wearing our earplugs. And on the last morning before work, Mary Lindholm, who's a member of this congregation and a doctor, she had lost her contact lens in her eye. Has that ever happened to any of you? That has happened to me. You just cannot get it. You can't find it, right? It's freaky. There's a contact lens somewhere in my eye. I didn't think my eye was that big, but it's lost, right? And she was panicking a little bit, like you do. And another woman named Jeannie said, "I can help." And she examined Mary's eye carefully in the bathroom while I held up my, phone flashlight. This became our group project. And I witnessed Jeannie put her finger gently in Mary's eye to fish out that small piece of plastic for her. And I was so moved by this. It was like the most moving thing that happened for me in La Romana. Because for so long, beloved, we were scared to be close to other human bodies. And here she was touching Mary's eye with her hand. I was moved because this is the kind of community that I long for. I'm convinced that in the kingdom of heaven, we can touch each other's eyes. Maybe not with spit, but with a nicely cleansed hand. An hour and a bus ride later, the two of them returned to one last sugarcane village and spent the day healing God's overlooked people. Mary, who was our only American doctor this year, so she was real busy, and Jeannie, ironically, the member of the team who helps the people of the villages find the right prescription eyeglasses from large bins of donated ones. Jeannie helps them, these people of the sugarcane villages, she helps them to see. She helps them with their vision. But God's beautiful people there in the dirt and dust of the sugarcane villages, they really help us to enlarge ours. We sang Amazing Grace on the bus in English and in Spanish. I was blind, but now I see. This blessing is by Jan Richardson. It's called Blessing of the Mud. Lest we think the blessing is not in the dirt, lest we think the blessing is not in the earth beneath our feet, lest we think the blessing is not in the dust, like the dust that God scooped up at the beginning and formed with God's two hands and breathed into with God's own breath. Lest we think the blessing is not in the spit. Lest we think the blessing is not in the mud. Lest we think the blessing is not in the mire, the grime, the muck. Lest we think God cannot reach deep into the things of the earth, cannot bring forth the blessing that shimmers within the sludge, cannot anoint us with a tender and grimy grace. Amen.